Hey Axis and Allies players, the good captain here. Welcome to my 9th video in my 12-part series on Axis and Allies Anniversary Edition 1941 setup. This video is the first Allied video, so we are going to put our Allied hat on for this video as well as the next two, and the first Allied player to go is the USSR. But before I discuss the Russian players' purchases and moves and whatnot, I have to address the rather large elephant in the room, and that is with regards to balance. This game is unfortunately imbalanced in favor of the Axis. This is just going to have to be an assertion I make for this video. I'm going to go into detail about why and how I feel that way when I get to my 12th video, but I have to say this here and now because a lot of the Allied response that I've developed is based on the fact that they are in a submissive state. So I don't really want to get off on too much of a tangent. I just wanted to plant that flag there. I'll go into it more later. I just want to say that here and now because the strategies I advocate for as the Allied player are novel even in online play. What you're going to see me do, what you're going to see me recommend is not something even online players are doing, especially with what I'm about to demonstrate as Russia. And it starts with the purchases. You'll notice here that I buy 2 fighters, 3 infantry, and save 1 with the 30 starting IPCs that the Russians have. Now I know this is a little different than what I've done in other videos with regards to purchases. Usually I tell you what I see other players do, but I'll just say that the common purchases I see are so varied and so inconsequential that it's not worth discussing them here. I've seen 4 armor, 1 artillery, and 2 infantry. I've seen 1 armor, 1 fighter, and 5 infantry. I've seen 2 armor, 2 arty, and 4 infantry. I've seen 6 armor. Okay, so none of these to me are terrifically interesting purchases. I don't know if it's because of the imbalance, but obviously Russia normally purchases some variety of ground units, maybe an air unit from time to time. But I stand on my own purchase of 2 fighters and 3 infantry as the superior one, and I will demonstrate exactly why that is, just like in every other video, in the purchase units phase. For now, let's move to the combat move phase. And surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, in most games, Russia does not have a combat movement phase. I don't want to say never, because the German player could have botched some area of the Barbarossa attack on their first turn, and there might be an opportunity. Maybe there's a strafe attack out there on the east front the Russian player might take, but generally speaking there's not going to be a combat movement phase, and that's largely due to the fact that the Russians really have no combat power to speak of beyond their infantry. Yes, they have an artillery piece in Russia, they have one up in Karelia, and they have 1 armor, but that's it. They're composed of infantry and anti-aircraft guns after that, so you shouldn't be surprised or feel uncomfortable with this. Just don't expect much in the way of any kind of combat move as Russia on your first turn. So before we discuss any kind of non-combat movement, we have to take Germany's first turn. So I'm going to go ahead and maneuver the pieces for Germany as I did in my Germany strategic video. Of course, there will be some variation from game to game and from player to player based on the strategy that Germany chooses to execute out on the East Front. But this strategy that I prefer to use as Russia is almost completely independent of whatever the German player does. So let me set the board and I'll be right back. Okay, much better. So this is what I consider to be the ideal G1 opener on the Eastern Front. Of course, there is some variation to this. As I stated in the Germany video, some folks like to go heavy north, but it really doesn't matter for what we have planned for Russia. One final note, I had the Germans take a loss up in the Baltic states and a loss down in the Ukraine. Usually the Germans will lose 2 infantry pieces on this push, but even if they lost none, my move would still be the same. And that is as follows. We are going to move every unit in the area into Belarusia. So after we're done pushing every unit we can into this territory, we're left with 13 infantry, 2 artillery, 1 armor, and 1 anti-aircraft gun. Now I know this move looks crazy. We aren't completely done with it yet. There's another very important aspect that needs to happen here. But let me just pause here and say that I don't advocate this because I like playing Axis and Allies like this. I advocate for this because of that disadvantage I spoke of at the top of the video. Again, if we're playing against an Axis opponent that knows how to use Japan, Germany, and Italy to maximum effect, things get worse for the Allies as time goes on, not better. So we have to put our Axis opponent to a decision for all his chips at the beginning of the game. As it stands now, we are going to lose this battle. If Germany commits all its ground forces in range and whatever air assets are in range, it's still a losing battle for the Allies. This maneuver is not complete and it requires help from the British. We'll discuss more about the relationship between Russia and the British on the UK strategic video, but suffice it to say that the British are going to be highly incentivized to use most of their Air Force and Navy clearing out the Atlantic. So Sea Zone 3, 6, and 5 will likely have Axis warships there. The British fighters, both of them on the UK, should assist in the destruction of any German ships in those 3 sea zones, and then both should fly to Belarusia. And it's this is the position we want to be in prior to G2. With this setup, the Germans have a less than 50-50 chance of winning the battle. I would normally roll out what those percentages are, but of course, since we don't know what kind of casualties the German player has taken, or even what their strategy has been, they didn't necessarily do an even up and down assault like I recommend. They could have gone heavy north, although that's better for the Russian player with regards to this strategy. But some modulation of defenses is going to be required. We are weak down south because of this, and so what you'll actually need to do is pull out your battle calculator, or if you're not using them, use the dumb battle calculator inside your head, and make sure that you have at least an even chance in both the Caucasus and Belarusia. So in this case, I would of course move the Kazakh infantry into the Caucasus, and I'm already planning on putting both my fighters and both infantry in the Caucasus as well. One other UK fighter may be available to help out with this, and absolutely should. If it's still alive, the fighter in Egypt should fly straight to the Caucasus and help out in its defense. So that's what I mean by modulating your forces. So in this particular case, I might have also just left the infantry in the eastern Ukraine, and of course I'll bring the 2 infantry from Novosibirsk into Russia. So now I'm going to talk about the benefits of doing this. And the primary benefit of doing this is it stalls the German advance on G2. Especially if you have an opponent who went heavy north, they're going to be counting pieces and thinking really hard about what they can actually get away with in regards to occupying Karelia. It's highly unlikely now that the German player will be able to expect to produce units out of the Karelian factory on G3. 13 infantry, 2 artillery, and an armor are no small threat, and with the fighter purchase that we made at the top of the turn, it's going to be even more threatening. Aside from that, they obviously will not be taking Belarusia, at least not without extraordinary high costs and risk. And finally, you put a lot of pressure on the adjacent territories. You're dead zoning from here, so to speak. The bottom line up front is this buys time, and this is one of the most important themes as the Allied player in the early game. Whatever side you take, the USA, UK, Russia, we need to delay the Axis wherever, whenever, and however we can, and as cheaply as we can. And in my study of this game, in my many playings, this is my go-to move as USSR. We'll now discuss the other non-combat moves for this power. But before we go pushing any more land units, let us not forget this Russian sub. This is probably the most forgotten piece to move in any Axis and Allies game ever. We're just going to go ahead and move this from Sea Zone 4 to Sea Zone 2. And no, there is no combat that occurs here. The German sub can just submerge before the battle even starts. Without a destroyer present, there's no combat there. If there's an opportunity to go for the cruiser by itself, if it is within range, that's could be a decision the Russian player might feel comfortable with. It's a 50-50 shot. If you're comfortable with that, go for it. If not, this is a great place to help the British fleet build up and to have access to the rest of the board and other opportunities. And in the Soviet Far East area, I sort of begin a Russian snake towards the west, just moving like so. I always leave one infantry as a blocker here. And I'll usually do something like this. That makes the Soviet Far East a dead zone with 7 infantry adjacent. It makes Buryatia a little bit of a dead zone because there's 3 infantry still in Stanovaj. Otherwise, we have a nice and healthy snake heading towards the west. There's more details about why I do this sort of move in the Japanese video. I'm not going to discuss it anymore here. Go ahead and check out the Japanese video, actually, if you'd like to know more about this move as the Russians. And when we get to the place units phase, we will go ahead and place both fighters and 2 out of the 3 infantry in the Caucasus. Again, this is situationally dependent, but 8 infantry and 2 fighters with an anti-aircraft gun is what I've chosen for my defense down here. The final infantry will, of course, go into Russia. When it comes to the collect income phase, we collect 26 IPCs. We also have 1 that we saved from the top of this turn. This makes a nice 27. I like 27 because it means I can buy 3 tanks and 4 infantry in Russia's turn 2. And this segues nicely into a discussion about purchasing. So I bought 2 fighters, and I hope it's a little more clear why I bought 2 fighters. But let me just ram this point home. Fighters for the Russians are, in my opinion, vital right out of the gate, as early as possible. They move 4, they attack 3, they defense 4, and we need all 3 of those special abilities every turn from here on out. We want to amplify our combat power, especially with the Belarusian bump, and these 2 fighters give us basically an extra pair of tanks anywhere in the theater. And when they're done doing that job, they can fly off to somewhere where they're vitally needed for defense. They can do this all in the same turn. And that's why, in my opinion, buying 2 fighters and 3 infantry is probably the strongest opener for Russia in terms of purchases. Again, Russia has a poverty of everything but infantry, and shoring up those deficiencies is paramount. And now we'll talk a little bit about short, mid, and long-range goals for this power. So the short-term goals are pretty obvious. You're going to be sparring with Germany on the Eastern Front. You might get yourself into a blocker war, and what I mean by that is both sides will make very small attacks with an infantry or 2 supported by aircraft, and you'll be clearing each other's blockers, picking off 1 or 2 infantry here or there. That you can expect to have happen for a few turns. In the mid to long game, we really are talking about what to do against Japan. And there's not a whole lot you can do, but what you can do is very important to understand. There are 2 ways to defend against Japanese aggression. The first and the simplest is the Novosibirsk defense. A lot of players like to stack up a substantially sized army in Novosibirsk and just dead zone Ivanki, Qinghai, and even Kazakh if the Japanese come from the south. Putting a big army here has a couple of advantages. You've got a very close supply route, right? 1 space away, and it's the farthest away for the Japanese. So any armies that they build up in Ningxia or Yakut will have to be stronger than the army opposing it. So it's a great way to keep the Japanese from really getting too far in too quickly. The other defense, and this is my preferred defense, is defending Ivanki and Qinghai individually. The advantage to this is that there are usually at least some Chinese troops, if not the fighter as well, stuck here, and so you have the benefit of having forces that can't do anything else but help you defend Qinghai. It's not much further away from Russia, and with all these infantry slowly trickling back to the west, you'll have a ready pool of reserves. It won't cost you anything in regards to fighting on the East Front. One final note before I close this video, I just want to address this one strategy, and this is one that was near and dear to my heart for so long. I tried everything I could to have Russia help midwife India into the middle of the game. I really liked the idea of a UK industrial complex in India, and I thought I saw an opportunity for Russia to make that happen. I even got the number down. 4 infantry into Persia on the first turn was a solid investment into making that dream a reality for the British, but it's just not ideal. Pulling Russian troops out of this area of the board and sending them into this nether region is not ideal. And you're taking this from somebody who really didn't want that to be true. This was a strategy that I really loved. I didn't want to have to drop this. I played many games implementing this strategy and watched it fall to pieces almost every single time. But all hope is not completely lost. I do have a way to mitigate the loss of India as the UK. It's going to happen, frankly. It's very difficult not to have happen, but you can sort of make it the contested ground if we do everything correctly and have a little bit of luck on our side. It's not too bad. And my absolute final note on this power is that this feels like the part one of a two-part mini-series in a series. The USSR and the UK work in very close tandem with each other, so much so that I feel like you can't get the complete picture of the Allied strategy with Russia by just listening to the Russia video. So I hope you'll stick around and watch the UK video and really absorb how these two powers can work together to help bring down the Axis. Okay, so this concludes this video. Let me know what you think of my Russia strategy, or share your own in the description box below. Thank you for watching this. All the best from the good captain, and bye-bye.